By the time the fire marshal's office called it a total loss, the Cedar Hollow Distillery had been burning for 6 hours, and not one drop of water had touched the building until it was already gone. 71 years of bourbon. 11,000 barrels aging in those rickhouses. The whole thing went up like a matchbook. And the strangest part, the part nobody in town could explain, was that the sprinkler system, the suppression foam, the alarm relay to the county station, none of it triggered. Not one valve opened. I was 40 miles away when my phone lit up, sitting in a diner outside Frankfurt eating eggs I had no appetite for. 18 hours earlier, they'd fired me. And as I watched the news anchor stand in front of those smoking timbers, I want to tell you I felt nothing. That would be a lie. What I felt was tired. The kind of tired that settles into your spine after you spent 33 years carrying something that turned out to weigh nothing to the people who owned it. My name's Dale Whitaker. I'm 56, and that morning, I'd been escorted out of the only place I'd ever really worked by a kid half my age who couldn't tell you the difference between a sour mash and a sweet one. Let me back up. I came to Cedar Hollow in 1992, 23 years old, fresh off a maintenance crew at a paper mill that had just shut down and put 400 men on the street. I didn't know a thing about whiskey. What I knew was systems, pipes, valves, pressure, heat, the way water and fire and time move through a building. The old man who ran the place back then, the founder's grandson, a quiet fella who wore the same brown cardigan every winter. He hired me to fix a boiler nobody else could figure out. I fixed it in 2 days, he kept me on, and somewhere over the next 3 decades, I stopped being the boiler guy and became the man who knew where every line ran, every shutoff sat, every weak joint in 70 years of patched-together infrastructure. A distillery isn't just a place that makes liquor. It's a living thing. You've got steam under pressure. You've got proof spirit that'll flash off at room temperature. You've got rickhouses packed floor to ceiling with barrels that are essentially 9 stories of slow-burning fuel. The whole operation lives one spark away from catastrophe every single day. The only reason it doesn't burn is because somebody built it so it wouldn't, and somebody kept building it that way year after year, while everybody else worried about marketing and shelf placement and what the bottle looked like on Instagram. That somebody was me. I designed the suppression system that wrapped around all 6 rickhouses. Not the original one. The original was a joke. A few rusted standpipes and a prayer. The real one, the one with the heat differential sensors I spec'd myself, the redundant pump house I lobbied 3 boards to fund, the foam cannons positioned to flood a rickhouse floor in 90 seconds. I drew it on graph paper at my kitchen table. I rebuilt it twice as the company grew. By 2015, it was the most sophisticated fire control system of any independent distillery in the state, and the insurance underwriters knew it. Our premiums were a fraction of what our competitors paid. That savings alone covered my salary 3 times over, though nobody ever did that math out loud. I never got a plaque for it. Didn't want one. What I wanted was for the place to still be standing the day my grandkids could walk through it. The first time I understood that the people upstairs and I were not on the same team was about 14 years ago. We had a batch go bad, not bad like flavor, bad like dangerous. A temperature regulator failed in the fermenting room over a holiday weekend, and a couple of mash tanks went off the rails. Nothing exploded, thank God, but it could have. I wrote it up. Detailed everything. Recommended we pull the affected product and overhaul the monitoring on those tanks. Cost would have been maybe 60 grand. The CFO at the time, a man who smelled like cologne you could taste, called me into his office and explained, real patient, like he was talking to a child, that the product was within tolerance and that pulling it would create a documentation event the auditors might ask about. He wanted me to amend my report, soften the language, say the tanks were operating nominally. I didn't do it. I left the report as it was and I filed it. 3 weeks later, my request for a new fermentation tech got denied. Then my maintenance budget got cut. Then I stopped getting invited to the operations meetings I'd attended for a decade. Nobody fired me. They just quietly walked me to the edge of the room and left me standing there. The message was clear enough. Build, Dale. Don't think. Don't ask. Don't write things down that we'd rather not read. But I never stopped writing things down. That's the thing about a man who fixes machines for a living. We document, we have to. A system you can't explain is a system you can't trust, and a system you can't trust will kill somebody eventually. So I kept records. Every near miss, every cut corner, every time somebody upstairs chose the cheap option over the safe one. Not to use against anybody. I want you to understand that. I wasn't building a case. I was building a memory because the building couldn't remember for itself and the people who ran it sure as hell wouldn't. There was a cost to all of it. There's always a cost. The biggest one came in 2009. My daughter, she was 17 then, sharp as a tack, wanted to study engineering at Purdue, got accepted, and the company had a scholarship program for employees' kids. Full ride, basically, if you hit a certain tenure and the executive committee signed off. I'd hit the tenure twice over. But that was the same year I'd refused to amend a safety filing for a regulatory inspection, and when my daughter's application came up, it got tabled. Then tabled again, then it disappeared into a subcommittee and never came back. She went to state school, took out $40,000 in loans. I spent the next 9 years paying those down a few $100s at a time, writing checks on the first of every month while I watched the executives who'd buried her application collect bonuses for operational efficiency. She's a structural engineer now, out in Denver, builds bridges that'll outlast all of us. She doesn't know the half of what it cost to get her there, and I'd like to keep it that way. A man doesn't tell his kid that the world charged her interest for his conscience. He just pays it and keeps his mouth shut. It was around then that I started building the thing I'd never tell anybody about. Not a weapon. I need you to hear that. A boundary. See, every safety system has a brain. A central logic that decides what's an emergency and what's a false alarm, when to dump water and when to hold. I built ours and rebuilt it, and the deepest layer of that logic. The part that lived below anything a technician could touch, below anything an executive even knew existed. Answered to one thing. It checked, constantly, quietly, whether the man responsible for the system was still the man responsible for the system, whether the chain of accountability was intact, whether the person who understood why every valve was placed where it was placed was still standing watch over it. As long as that was true, everything ran as designed. Sensors talked to pumps. Pumps talked to cannons. The building protected itself the way a building should, the way I'd spent my life making sure it would. But the logic had a condition. If the responsible party was removed improperly, terminated, locked out, erased without a clean handoff to someone who'd actually been trained to hold the same accountability, the system did something most people would find hard to believe. It didn't sabotage anything. It didn't start a fire. It just stopped vouching. It withdrew its trust. Every active suppression command required a validation handshake against my credentials. And without that handshake, the system would go quiet, dormant, sitting there looking perfectly fine, every gauge reading normal, every light green, right up until the moment it was actually needed. I filed the design under my own name. 2011, a little engineering LLC I set up with my brother-in-law's help, the suppression logic and the sensor architecture both, documented and dated and tucked away in a safe deposit box at a bank in Lexington. The official position was that I'd licensed the system to the distillery. The fine print said the license held only as long as I did. The day they removed me without cause, the license to operate my design lapsed. Legally. Queenly. The way a thing lapses when the man who built it is no longer trusted to stand behind it. I told myself I'd never need it. I genuinely believed, right up until the end, that decent people would do the decent thing when it counted. I was wrong about that. I usually am. The company changed hands 2 years ago. A private equity outfit out of Chicago bought controlling interest, the kind of people who talk about unlocking value and right-sizing the cost structure, and they installed their own man to run things. The founder's family cashed out and moved to Florida, and that brown cardigan and everything it stood for walked out the door for good. The new fellow they put in charge was named Brett, 31 years old, came from a consulting background, never spent a day actually making anything. He had a way of saying my name that made it sound like a line item. He called the Rickhouse's inventory assets. He called the people who'd worked the floor for 20 years head count. First week on the job, he stood up in front of the whole crew and said he was excited to challenge our legacy assumptions. I'm a legacy assumption. That's what I was to him. Something old, something in the way, something that cost money and didn't show up in a quarterly slide deck. He hired consultants, bright young people with laptops and certainty, who walked the property for 2 days and produced a report saying our safety infrastructure was over-engineered and represented significant trapped capital. They wanted to decommission half the suppression system, sell the redundant pump house, cut the monitoring contract. They had a spreadsheet that showed how much money it would save, and the spreadsheet didn't have a column for what it would cost if the building burned, because the building burn wasn't in the spreadsheet's imagination. It had never happened, therefore to them it could never happen. I wrote a report. 41 pages. I titled it plainly, Why This System Exists. I walked through every fire that hadn't happened, every disaster the design had quietly absorbed over 30 years. I flagged it urgent. I requested 15 minutes of Brett's time. The document tracking software showed it was never opened. Not once. 3 weeks later, his assistant sent me a one-line email. We're not prioritizing legacy infrastructure reviews this cycle. Legacy. There was that word again. I won't pretend it didn't get to me. After 33 years of standing between that building and the fire, it was always one bad day from being filed under legacy infrastructure landed like a slap. But I didn't yell. I didn't quit. I'd seen enough men ruin themselves on a single satisfying outburst. I just folded it up inside me and kept showing up, kept doing the work, kept the building safe in spite of the people who owned it. Then came the morning. Everything ended. It was a Thursday, early October. That first real cold snap when the leaves start letting go. I came in at 6, like always, made my rounds, checked the pump house, signed the log. At 8 o'clock, Brett's assistant called and asked me to come to the conference room on the second floor. I figured it was about the consultant's report. I figured wrong. Brett was sitting at the head of the table with the HR director beside him and a security guard I'd never seen standing by the door. There was a folder in front of Brett. He didn't ask me to sit down. Dale, he said, we're making some structural changes to the operations team. As part of streamlining, we've decided to eliminate the chief facilities engineer position effective today. I looked at the folder. I looked at the guard. I looked at Brett, who was looking at a point somewhere over my left shoulder, the way people do when they've practiced this in a mirror and still can't manage the eyes. Effective today, I said. Effective immediately. We'll be transitioning facilities oversight to a third-party management firm. They're very capable. Your severance package is detailed in here. He slid the folder and edged toward me. I didn't pick it up. I knew what was in it. I knew, too, that my pension, the real one, the defined benefit plan from the old days that the new owners had been trying to claw their way out of for 2 years, vested in full at the end of the month. 3 more weeks. They were saving themselves a number with a comma in it by walking me out 3 weeks early. That's all this was. That's all I'd ever been. A number with a comma in it. I've got barrels in Rickhouse 4 that need rotating before the temperature drops, I said, and the pump house gasket on line 2 is due. The management firm will handle all of that. I almost laughed. The management firm. A binder full of phone numbers and a quarterly site visit. I thought about telling him. I genuinely did. I stood there in that overheated conference room with a severance folder between us, and I thought about explaining, slow and patient, like the CFO had once explained things to me, exactly what was about to happen the moment my badge stopped vouching for that building. But I didn't, because I'd written it all down. I'd flagged it urgent. I put it in his inbox and he hadn't opened it. I'd given them 33 years of warning, 41 pages of warning, and a one-line reply telling me my life's work was a legacy nobody had time for. So I said, all right. The HR director slid a paper across from me to sign acknowledging receipt. I signed it. The guard walked me to my truck. I handed over my badge at the gate, watched the kid in the booth deactivate it with 2 taps on a screen, and I drove off the property at 8:40 in the morning under a cold gray sky. What I didn't say, what none of them knew, is that the moment that badge went dead, the building stops trusting them. Every suppression command, every sensor relay, every automatic valve in that whole system was now waiting on a handshake that would never come again. The fire control brain I'd spent 30 years perfecting did exactly what I'd designed it to do when its keeper was removed without cause. It went dormant. Quiet. Every gauge still reading green. I want to be clear about something, because this is the part people get wrong when they hear the story. I did not start that fire. I have never in my life started a fire. I would no sooner harm that building than harm my own daughter. What I did was build a system that would only protect people who'd earned the right to be protected by it, and then I let the people in charge make their choice. They chose to remove the one man who kept it honest. The building simply stopped pretending everything was fine. The fire started 11 hours later. Nobody knows exactly how. A frayed line, a spark off a forklift. The same ordinary hazard that lives in every distillery on Earth every day of the year. Ordinary. The kind of thing the system was built to catch in its first 90 seconds and drown before it could spread. The sensors saw it. I have no doubt the sensors saw it. They saw it, and they had nothing to vouch to and nobody to call, and so the heat climbed and climbed in the dark while the management firm's emergency line rolled to a voicemail box that, it later came out, hadn't been set up yet by the time a passing trucker on the county road saw the glow and called it in. Rickhouse 4 was fully involved. Then 5. Then the Stillhouse. 11,000 barrels. 71 years. Gone before the first engine even arrived, because the nearest station was 22 minutes out, a fact I'd put in my report, on page 19, as the entire justification for why we needed our own suppression capacity in the first place. I learned most of this later, in pieces, from men who still worked there and texted me through the night. Dale, the system never tripped. Dale, none of it came on. Dale, what happened? You've got to tell us what happened. I didn't answer, not because I was hiding anything, because there was nothing left to say that the building hadn't already said for me. The phone call started the next morning. Brett first. Then the HR director. Then a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be the private equity firm's general counsel. I let them all go to voicemail. Around noon, a courier knocked on my door with an envelope, hand-delivered, marked urgent. Inside was an offer. Full reinstatement, retroactive, double the severance. A signing bonus that made my eyes go wide for about half a second, and a line at the bottom requesting that I report to the site to assist with system restoration at my earliest convenience. I called the number on the letter. Brett picked up on the first ring, and the man who'd called me a legacy assumption now sounded like he was being held underwater. Dale, thank God. Look, things were handled poorly yesterday. That's on me, that's on us, but this offer makes it right. We need you back on site. We need the system brought back up. There's nothing to bring up, Brett. It's ash. The suppression for the rebuild will be rebuilding. The insurers are all ready. We need the original architecture. We need you to. You decommissioned the architecture. Or you were planning to. It's in the consultant's report, the one I assume you did read. A silence, then lower. Why didn't it come on, Dale? Tell me why it didn't come on. And here's the thing. I could have lied. I could have called it a malfunction, a tragedy, an act of God. Instead, I told him the truth. Slow and patient, the way it was always going to come out. It didn't come on because it stopped trusting you the moment you walked me off that property. That system validates against the man accountable for it. You removed the man. The system did what it was built to do. It stopped vouching. I documented all of this. It's on page 31 of the report you never opened. And it's in a filing dated 2011 that's got my name on it, not yours. You didn't just lose your engineer. You were never licensed to run my design without me. I heard him breathing. I heard, faintly, other voices in the room behind him, the kind of urgent low murmur that means lawyers have entered the building. You're holding us hostage, he said finally. No, I told him. I'm letting you find out what the building was worth. You had 33 years to learn it the easy way. I hung up. He didn't call back. By that evening, I understood why. A junior lawyer at the firm, digging through the facility records looking for any thread to pull, had found the licensing filing. My name. My LLC. A patent on the suppression logic and a copyright on the sensor architecture. Both dated 2011. Both wholly mine. Both licensed to the distillery under terms that lapsed the instant I was terminated without cause. The outside counsel they brought in, the kind that bills 4 figures an hour, reviewed it and came back with a conclusion that must have landed like a second fire. The company had no legal right to rebuild using my design. Couldn't reverse engineer it without infringing, couldn't restore it without me. And the insurance carrier, once they understood that a documented urgent written warning about exactly this failure mode had been delivered to leadership and ignored, had questions of their own. Big ones. The kind that turn a covered loss into a contested one. They'd saved 3 weeks of pension. It cost them 71 years and counting. I didn't go public. Didn't give an interview. Didn't post a word. Didn't gloat to a single soul. But somebody did. One of the men who texted me that night, a floor worker who'd been there 19 years and watched the same culture chew up better men than him, leaked the one-line email. We're not prioritizing legacy infrastructure reviews this cycle. Sent 3 weeks before the building burned, put next to a photo of the smoking ruins. It didn't need a caption. The whole industry passed it around. Old distillers, young engineers, people who'd never set foot in Kentucky. The message underneath was always the same. He told them. They wouldn't read it. The building remembered anyway. The call I actually cared about came 9 days later. I was in my workshop out back, sanding down a rocking chair I'd been building for my daughter's first kid, due in the spring. Radio on low. Sawdust in the light. My phone rang, and the caller ID said Blue Ridge Heritage Distilleries, an outfit 2 states over, family-owned, 4 generations deep, exactly the kind of place that still understood what it was sitting on. The man on the line was the owner himself, not an HR rep, not a recruiter. The owner. Mr. Whitaker, he said. I've spent the last week reading a 41-page report somebody was kind enough to send me. I've got it in front of me. There's coffee stains on it now and notes in every margin. And I've got one question for you before I say anything else. He paused. How do I make sure what happened to them never happens to me? I set down the sandpaper. You read the whole thing, I said. Twice. And I'm going to have every man on my leadership team read it too. Because you were right about the thing that matters most, Mr. Whitaker. A building doesn't run on bricks. It runs on the people who know why the bricks are where they are. And those people aren't a cost to be managed. They're the only thing standing between you and the fire. We talked for an hour. Not about money, though the money came later and it was fair. We talked about pressure and heat and time, about how water moves through a building, about the difference between a system that obeys and a system that's trusted. He asked me how I'd handle the redundant pump house. He asked about the gasket on line 2 like he already knew the answer and just wanted to hear me say it. By the end of the call, I knew I'd be driving 2 states over come spring. I negotiated, this time. A seat at the table, veto power over any change to the safety architecture, in writing, non-negotiable. And one clause I'd never had the standing to ask for before, that I could walk away, fully vested, the day anyone violated the safety principles we'd agreed to put down on paper together. They said yes to all of it before I finished asking. Cedar Hollow is still in litigation. The private equity firm is bleeding lawyers in 3 directions. Brett resigned, or was resigned depending on who you ask. And last I heard he was advising startups on operational transformation, which is a thing you can apparently do even after you transform a 71-year-old institution into a parking lot. The insurance fight will drag on for years. The brand may not survive it. Some mornings I think about all that bourbon, all that patient slow work soaked into oak over decades, gone in a single cold night, and it puts a weight in my chest. I never wanted that. I want you to believe that. I'd have given anything for that building to still be standing. But I'd have given it on the condition that the people inside it understood what they were standing in. My daughter came up last weekend with her husband, 8 months along, glowing the way they do. She found the rocking chair before I could finish it and ran her hand down the arm, and she got quiet and she said, "Dad, this is going to last forever." That's the idea, I told her. She doesn't know about the report or the filing or the call. To her, I'm just her old man who lost his job and seems, strangely, more at peace than he's been in years. Maybe someday I'll tell her. Probably not. Some things a man builds for himself, and the only proof they ever existed is that the thing they protected is still standing. I finished the chair that night after she left. Put 3 coats of finish on it, let it cure in the cold garage with the door open and the radio low. And I sat in it once, just once, to make sure the joints were true. They were, built right from the start, so it'll hold whatever weight comes to rest on it. The building remembered who built it, and this time, the man who'd built it was somewhere new, in a workshop that smelled of oak and oil, holding the quiet knowledge that he'd finally found people who'd never have to be taught the same lesson twice. The thing nobody tells you about doing the right thing for 30 years is that it almost never pays you back in the moment. It paid Brett to call me a legacy assumption. It paid that old CFO to ask me to soften a report. The cheap choice always looks like the smart choice, right up until the night the building burns and there's nobody left who knows where the valves are. Cause and effect doesn't care how clever your spreadsheet is. You cut the man who holds the system together. The system comes apart. Not out of spite. Out of physics. Out of the plain arithmetic of what happens when you remove a load-bearing wall and act surprised the roof comes down. I think about my daughter's loans more than I think about that fire. Because the fire was just a building, and buildings can be rebuilt. What couldn't be bought back were the years I spent paying interest on my own conscience. But I'd do it again. Every dollar. Because the day you trade your honesty for a favor, you don't just lose the favor when it gets pulled. You lose the one thing that was ever really yours. I kept mine. They couldn't fire that. If there's anything I'd want a younger man to take from all this, it's that the world will test you in 3 places, and you'd better be ready in all 3. It'll test what you're willing to refuse, even when refusing costs your kid a scholarship. It'll test whether you understood your work deeply enough to know its real worth when everyone around you calls it obsolete. And it'll test whether you can stand still and quiet through years of being pushed to the edge of the room without breaking, without exploding, without giving them the outburst that would have let them call you the problem. I wasn't smarter than Brett. He went to better schools than I ever saw the inside of. But I knew my system the way you know your own hands, and knowing a thing all the way down is a kind of power no consultant can put on a slide. That's not luck. That's 30 years of paying attention when nobody was watching, and the patience. God, the patience cost me the most. There were nights I wanted to walk into that conference room and tell them exactly what they were standing on. I never did. I just kept showing up, kept the building safe, kept my record clean and my mouth shut, and let the structure speak when the time came. A man who can hold his fire is a dangerous man, not because he'll hurt you, but because he'll outlast you. I'm building a rocking chair for a grandkid who isn't here yet. Built right, so it'll hold. That's all any of it ever was. You honor the work, you respect the people who do it, and you build things that last. And when the people who forgot that come looking for you, you don't have to say a word. The thing you built right says it for you.